Hello, I'm here today to talk to you about the macroeconomic impact of the Second World War. So, what caused World War II? What were the precursors to it? Well, the most important one is definitely the Great Depression. The Great Depression was caused by the New York stock market crash and it affected the entire world at the time. The German economy was damaged and the United States economy was damaged to the point where in the US we had an unemployment rate of up to 25%. And in Germany, their economy was so bad and their people were so desperate that it led rise to such radical leaders such as Adolf Hitler, who took power and then started World War II in 1939. Even before the United States joined the war effort, they could feel the effects of World War II starting, and they were certainly taking sides with either the Axis or the Allied powers. And of course, they were taking sides with Britain and France, the Allied powers in Europe, and taking sides against Japan for conquering China, which they viewed as a threat to democracy. And Japan's assets in the United States were frozen, and we pretty much cut off all of our trade with them. The United States also had a policy called cash and carry, where allied nations only could come to the United States and purchase weapons and tanks and vehicles and other war supplies in cash, and then they would take it back to their country so that U.S. shipping companies didn't have to risk being shot by German U-boats. So after Pearl Harbor, the United States has joined the war, and this is when they really kick into full gear. They are producing lots of tanks and airplanes and weaponry for themselves and for the Allies. They're relying on U.S. companies to do that, so companies like Ford and other automobile companies would switch to making tanks and making aircraft. And many women, too, were populating these factories, many women coming into the labor force. So that's an expansion of the workforce, because before these women were simply mothers. They were discouraged workers in a way. They were not actively seeking jobs, but this war brought about a necessity for them to have jobs. And this is when we also saw the U.S. unemployment rate reach the lowest that it has been in our entire history at 1.2%. And this was in 1944. The war also enabled the U.S. to be a huge exporter, and during this time, the U.S., because of sanctions against Germany and Japan, and not using oil from certain countries, was providing the vast majority of oil for the Allied countries and the war effort. And it was manufacturing nearly as many munitions as all of its allies and enemies combined. So then in 1945, we have the end of the war. Germany surrenders first in Europe, and then in 1945, in August, Japan surrenders, and that is considered the end of World War II. So now that the war is over, all of the soldiers can go home, and some economists actually predicted that there would be mass unemployment because these factories wouldn't be able to accommodate all of these extra workers coming in. But it turns out that all of these people had this much money to spend, and the demand for consumer goods went up so high that the factories were able to produce consumer goods for this new market. Not only with the United States, but with foreign markets too, there was an incredible demand for manufactured goods because the infrastructure of the other countries had been destroyed in the war. All over Europe, in Russia, France, Germany, Britain, places had been bombed and destroyed, and they just did not have the manufacturing power that the United States did. And the United States then was in a way like how China is now. They export so much to other countries and they are becoming incredibly wealthy off of it. And this is partly the reason why the United States was incredibly wealthy around the World War II era in the 1950s, was because there was incredible demand from foreign nations for manufactured goods, and we were able to supply them then. And finally, some government intervention too. The government invested in its own citizens with the GI Bill, which enabled veterans to have home loans and they could invest in education for themselves to have better careers. And overall, that bolstered the economy over time for these young men that were coming home. And that was my presentation. I hope that you liked it and I've enjoyed this class. Thank you, everybody.